Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys about something that really needs to be said more often. And it's something I don't always like to say because it can give the wrong idea to a lot of novice lifters, but we also do need to say it. Over the years, I have given novice lifters a lot of rules. And I think one of the things that comes across people is that because I speak with a lot of conviction, I can be very convincing with what I say, and people note that. They note that conviction. And when you speak with conviction, oftentimes people tend to take it in better. They absorb it better. They're more likely to listen to it. But the problem we have with that is that I and many other people give a lot of really, really good rules to novice lifters, right? We give them some great rules, some phenomenal rules, fantastic rules. The problem is that they're not really rules, they're guidelines. And they're guidelines that very frequently are going to need to be broken the more advanced that you get, right? We know that. We know that. That's a fact. The problem we have is that the novice lifter doesn't know when it's appropriate to break them, and most of the time it's never going to be appropriate for the novice lifter to break those rules. But it doesn't mean that they're hard, fast rules, and I can give you guys a lot of examples. How about when we tell novice lifters, and when you realize that this is actually a guideline, if we word it carefully, we always say, well, as a novice lifter, you should do exercises that work the most muscle possible, do the longest effective range of motion. Now, I stole that line from Rip Toe at Starting Strength, giving credit where credit's due, but it's true. And I think the best way to put that for the novice lifters is that we should reword it. If you make it a guideline, it's that as a novice lifter, you should generally, okay, let's throw that in. You should generally be selecting exercises that allow you to work as many muscles as possible through the longest effective range of motion as possible. Now, the other issue we have with that is that we could transpose it over to maybe lift the most weight possible through the longest effective range of motion. Now, that's one that gets said, and I'm going to disagree completely, because that's where we know that Good Morning straight up stomp Romanian deadlifts, even though the Romanian deadlift meets that criteria better, right? But the point still stands. They should generally be picking exercises that work the most muscles possible. Well, that's well and good, but once you're no longer a novice, you don't need to do that. Not saying you shouldn't have a bias towards those exercises, but when you're no longer a ranked novice, that turns into a loose guideline, doesn't it? Right? Let's change that over to how that hard, unbreakable rule for the novice lifter, how does that apply to the intermediate lifter? Okay, how does that apply to them? Right? Well, we say to an intermediate lifter, you should generally be biased in the direction of exercises that use as many muscles as possible through the longest effective range of motion possible. Okay. Yeah, that gets a little more tricky, doesn't it? Because we kind of start breaking that more and more. In fact, where do we start to see partials of some type, small partials? A lot of times those become better exercises, right? Floor press. Floor press, anybody? We start cutting range of motion. How about in certain cases where maybe you have an intermediate lifter with a tricep weakness who has access to boards, and you might have him rep a 3 board for triceps, not for overall muscle mass. Because we come over to something like that is a partial. And because it's a partial, we're largely removing the pecs from the equation, aren't we? If you want a hell of a tricep exercise, specifically for building triceps in a way that helps you on the top half of your bench press. Okay. But will we ever want a novice to do that? God, no. But if we come back over to that novice rule that we give, 2 fantastic exercises for specific niche purposes would be thrown away, right? For the floor press, it's oftentimes a partial, right? It's oftentimes partial. It is. Most guys can't touch their chest on the floor press. Most guys are going to be at least 3 or 4 inches off their chest on a floor press. It is an amazing exercise. In fact, for many guys, it will bring their bench up. It'll bring their pecs up. It'll resolve a lot of their problems, won't it? Phenomenal exercise. But if we follow that guideline that we just gave, guess what? We wouldn't do that exercise, would we? And it's oftentimes what a person needs. In fact, sometimes it's what the skinny novice needs. I have skinny novices who I put on the floor press and don't let them bench, as far as clients go. All right? I have at least one. We wouldn't do that. Even worse, man, what about that board press? Because you'll see some pretty strong guys out there who will say, well, why would I ever bother with an extension when I can do a 700-pound board press? What is an extension going to do for my triceps? At least my triceps in relation to building a bench press that a 700-pound board press won't achieve. That's a quote from a elite powerlifter, by the way, whose name eludes me at this moment. Got a point, doesn't he? Okay, maybe the long head's not going to work as effectively, but you're still going to build a hell of a lot of triceps size and strength. Well, we just took a press and we just removed the chest to some extent, and we cut 6 inches off the range of motion. That totally violates that rule. Yeah, it totally violates that rule. Using that rule, we would never use a safety bar squat. Why? Because it replicates front squat. Arguably less muscles being worked. Okay. We would never do a block pull off of a 2-inch or 1-inch block or mat, would we? We're cutting range of motion. In a lot of cases, we're removing muscles involved. Why would we ever do a tricep extension when we could do a dip? Well, there's a place for that. Now, granted, I'm more inclined towards dips myself. But you see the problem we have here? These are rules that are phenomenal for the novice lifter to follow. But they're really just guidelines, aren't they? Because realistically, we could say, oh, sure, the advanced lifter breaks all these rules all day long, and that makes sense. That's absolutely true. Well, what about when you're coaching a novice lifter one-on-one? What about the example I just gave with the floor press? Doesn't it break that rule? Yeah, it breaks the guideline. It has wiggle around the guideline. But there are situations in which it's warranted. Now, does that mean that the novice lifter should make his own decision to break that guideline? Probably not. They don't have the experience to judge that. But when you're a trainer or a coach, and you're working with even a novice lifter, and you look at their situation, and in a perfect example, one of my guys, really skinny guy, underweight, teenager, needs to gain a bunch of weight. The bench press made his sternum hurt in the middle because it stretched so low, because his muscle and his rib cage and everything is so small due to being underweight, needing to gain weight, that it actually stretches his sternum and makes it hurt when he touches his chest with a bench press. Well, the floor press resolves that, doesn't it? And it still builds his bench and it builds his pecs. Okay? Violates that rule. Does it, though? See, that's the thing. When we give these guidelines, and what are they? They're guidelines. But at first glance, the floor press for that guy might sound like it broke that guideline, but it doesn't. Why? The longest effective range of motion. If we have a range of motion that's now compromising the integrity of your joints because you don't have enough meat on you, that's not effective range of motion. The floor press has given us the best effective range of motion. What about when you have someone who doesn't quite have the mobility to deadlift off the floor, and you put them on a 2-inch mat or a 3-inch mat and you start working them down? People say, aha, well, that's breaking the guideline too. Yeah, because the novice lifter doesn't know how the rules and guidelines work. They don't understand them. So you have to give them these hard, fast rules. But when you're coaching someone and they're struggling with mobility, if we have to cut a little bit of range of motion out by doing a block pull, what happened? What happened? We went to the longest effective range of motion for them right now. We didn't even break the guideline. But that's the point. They're guidelines. And there will be times when you're going to break them. And for more advanced lifters, it can be a problem. You know, when you're an advanced lifter and you give good guidelines to novices, and then they see what you do, and they're like, but you break all the rules that you give us. That's correct, because they're guidelines, and they're guidelines for novice lifters that are intended to steer you in the right direction. They're never intended to be dogma that must be followed like a religion. They're good guidelines to keep you moving in the right direction as a novice. But they will also need to be broken at a certain point in your training career. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.